On one of the nights, it so happened that the king heard a woman crying from a neighboring elm tree. The king immediately called on guard and said, "Who is waiting?" Birbal said, "I am here, my master. What is the command?" The king said, Go. Go to that place where the lady is crying and ask her what is the reason for her grief and return quickly." Birbal immediately obeyed. In the meantime, the king, dressed all in black, followed Birbal to see what he will do next. Anybody who heard him would have been convinced that he was a no common sworder. Now, Rajeshwar was completely convinced and he wanted to take Birbal to the king. When they both went to King Roop Sen, he, who is a man of few words and many ideas, upon hearing to Rajeshwar's introduction to Birbal, said, "O Rajput, what shall I give you for your daily expenditure?" To that Birbal said, "Give me 1,000 ounces of gold daily." The king was astonished. He said, "I have not," responded the Rajput somewhat stiffly. "I have first a wife, second a son, third a daughter, fourth myself, and there's no fifth person with me." All the people of the court, on hearing this, turning aside their heads to laugh, and even the women who were peeping at the scene covered their mouths with their veil. The Rajput was then dismissed the presence. It is, however, noticeable amongst you humans that the world often takes you at your own valuation. Set a high price upon yourself, and each man shall say to his neighbor, "In this man there must be something." Tell everyone that you are brave, clever, generous, or even handsome, and after a time they will begin to believe you. And when thus you have attained success, it will be harder for them to unconvince and what you had convinced them. Thus, "Listen not to him, Sirrah," cried Raja Vikram to Dharmadhwaj, the young prince who had fallen a little way behind and was giving ear attentively to the vampire's ethics. "Listen to him not, and tell me, villain, with these ignoble principles of shine, what will become of modesty, humility, self-sacrifice, and a host of other good qualities? Which are good qualities?" "So I know not," rejoined the Betal, "neither do I care, but my habitually inspiriting a succession of human bodies has taught me one fact. The man who is wise knows himself, and is therefore neither unduly humble or elated, because he had no more to do with making himself than with the cut of his cloak or with the fitness of his loin. But the fool either loses his head by comparing himself with still greater fools, or is prostrated when he finds himself inferior to other and lesser fools. This shyness he calls modesty, humility, and so forth. Now, whenever entering a corpse, whether it be of a man, woman, or a child, I feel peculiarly modest. I know that my tenement lately belonged to some conceited ass. And will you bump me against the ground?" asked Raja Vikram angrily. The Betal muttered some reply scarcely intelligible about his having this time stumbled upon a metaphysical thread of ideas, and then continued the story. Now Roop Sen, the king, began by inquiring of himself why the Rajput had rated his services so highly. Then he reflected that if this recruit had asked so much money, it must have been for some reason which would afterward become apparent. Next, he hoped that if he gave him so much, his generosity might someday turn out to his own advantage. Finally, with this idea in his mind, he summoned Birbal and the steward of his household and said to the latter, "Give this Rajput 1,000 ounces of gold daily from our treasury." It is related that Birbal made the best possible use of his wealth. He used every morning to divide it into 2 portions, one of which was distributed to Brahmins and Purohitas. Of the remaining money, having made 2 parts, he gave one as alms to pilgrims and to Vishnu's mendicants and to sannyasis, whose bodies, smeared with ashes, were hardly covered with a narrow cotton cloth and rope about their loins, and those heads whose artificial hair, clotted like a rope, besieged his gate. With the remaining fourth, having caused food to be prepared, he regaled the poor, while he himself and his family ate what was left. Every evening, arming himself with sword and buckler, he took up his position as guard at the royal bedside, and walked around it all night, sword in hand. If the king chanced to wake and asked who was present, Birbal immediately gave the reply, "Birbal is here. Whatever command you give, that he will obey." And often Roop Sen gave him unusual commands, for it is said, "To try thy servant, bid him to do things in season and out of season. If he obeys willingly, know him to be useful. If he replies, dismiss him at once." In such manner, through desire of money, Birbal remained on guard all night, and whether eating, drinking, sleeping, sitting, or even going to the bathroom, he had to make sure during the 24 hours that he had a watchful guard on his master. Now, on one of the nights it so happened that the king heard a woman crying from a neighboring cemetery. The king immediately called on guard and said, "Who is waiting?" Birbal said, "I am here, my master. What is the command?" The king said, Go to that place where the lady is crying and ask her what is the reason for her grief and return quickly." Birbal immediately obeyed. In the meantime, the king, dressed all in black, followed Birbal to see what he will do next. Birbal reached the cemetery, and there he sees a beautiful woman loaded with jewels from head to toe, holding a horn in her right and a necklace in her left. Sometimes she danced, sometimes she jumped, sometimes she ran about. There was no tear in her eye at all, but beating her head and making lamentable cries, she kept dashing herself on the ground.